Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With me, we have a special guest, Jim Dean, with Democracy for America. Jim's going to talk about Democracy for America, the roots of it, where it's going, and what it's done since its inception. Jim, first of all, tell us about the roots of Democracy for America.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me on the show, David. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure to have you for all of us.
No, it's great to be here. And, it's Democracy for America got started in 2004 after my brother Howard's campaign ended. And he really, the idea that he had behind this was really to do what Ralph Reed and Newt Gingrich had done so successfully for the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s, which specifically was to help people run for office, both especially locally, but also on the statewide level, and start bringing new folks into the party and start bringing new folks and helping them take responsibility over the political process. He did this for about a year, and then he went to become chair of the DNC, and we kept going, and we actually expanded that mission a little bit so that we could really be more of a leadership development entity, which we would really help not only people run for office, but also help people who want to join the party, get involved in Democratic Party politics, get involved in community activism. We started a training program, which has now had about 25,000 people go through it.
Now, when you say DNC, that's the Democratic National Committee.
That's correct.
Now, the DNC, isn't that in its essence the titular head of the entire party?
Well, and right now, the president is the head of the party because the president's a Democrat.
Correct.
But at that point, he was one of 3 or 4 of the sort of primary vehicles to get Democrats elected primarily to federal office, meaning the Congress and Senate. The other 2, at least, being the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. Howard's thing of the DNC was really to help the state parties because they had been left moribund for about 15 years, and that's a lot of reasons why the Democrats had lost a lot of elections, both for Congress and especially the presidency in 2000 and 2008. So he embarked on what was called the 50-state strategy to try to also help people run for office in state and build the farm team and really build kind of a party structure that would be able to help candidates run for office for when they were running for Congress in 2006 and 2008.
So it was, in a sense, very, very much of what we call a grassroots type of organization.
Yeah.
The same way that Democracy for America had been and presumably continues to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, the Democratic Party is a coalition party, and I'm very proud of that. We don't march in lockstep. We don't march to one specific ideology. We have a set of values that we all believe in, but we're really at our best when the people really run this party. And, I think a lot of our mission has been about helping people do this. It's hard to get into politics. As you know, it's hard to have a job all day, take care of the folks you love, and then go to a planning and zoning meeting for 2 hours or go to a phone bank for 2 hours. But that's the stuff that makes the world go round. That's what gets good people elected to office, and it's what brings about good government when we're taking responsibility. Democracy is only as good as the level of commitment that we all have to make it work. It's not a spectator sport, and I think that was very much Howard's thing at the DNC, but it's really very much ours at Democracy for America.
What has Democracy for America accomplished as we've begun after, you mentioned after Howard ended his presidential campaign, took a month off, and then started Democracy for America in March, I believe it was March 19th.
February.
Well, I know he dropped out of the race February 19th, and I believe he took a month off, and it was March 19th that he actually started in San Francisco, and then came to New York to have that second event establishing and promoting Democracy for America. Now, what has Democracy for America, what are its main accomplishments in those it's now 5+ years?
Yeah, 5 years. Who would have thunk it? There are some metrics which I'm going to throw out to you, but the real accomplishment is not so much about DFA, it's about the people the million members that we have now, and the work that they do. And here in Connecticut, of course, as you know, there are folks that have been out at the bridge in Westport weekend after weekend, trying to bring more education to the public about the Iraq War. You've had folks that have been joining the party and making local parties much more dynamic. You've had some great local races here, and especially yours. That is the stuff that's really our biggest accomplishment, and it's hard for me to quantify that. Our training program has had about 25,000 people go through it. We are up the million members. We had 350,000 when we started, so we've had a lot of folks join, and we've supported about 1,000 candidates who are running for office. But that doesn't really tell the story. It's not about how many folks do we get elected and how many of our folks are involved. A very good illustration of what we've done is the California Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. They have an executive board of about 150 people. About a third of those are DFA members. But that has nothing to do with an ideology. They, in fact, don't really agree with each other on every single issue. But they're citizen political leaders right now, and they are bringing accountability and transparency to the party, and they are making it a much better party and a much better vehicle for more citizens to get involved. And those are hard things to measure, but those are the things that really I'm most proud about, because it's the work that other folks have been doing.
You mentioned the training academies.
Yeah.
Go into a little bit more depth about what types of things occur at training academies.
Well, it's a lot of fun. We have them pretty much every weekend. Not this weekend, but we're hoping to bring one to Connecticut this year, by the way. It's 2 days, and we start with a lot of math on trying to figure out how to target voters for a particular campaign, how to understand how many votes you need and where you're going to get them from. So many candidates waste a lot of precious resources just going after votes. You've got to go after votes in a very tactical way in order to make your campaign viable. So we start with that, and then we move on to recruiting volunteers, how to raise money both online and offline, how to engage the media, a lot of other tactical ways to really sort of give a holistic view of what a campaign is like. The purpose of this is not to necessarily get every person to run for office. It's because it allows the folks who go to this training to be a lot smarter if they want to get involved in politics, and not just a campaign race, but also a legislative action. And it allows them. We talk a lot about how to plan for either legislative actions or election campaigns, so that when people decide that they've got a couple of hours a week to donate to making democracy better, they're going to be able to utilize that time in the most productive way possible. And so we've been doing that every week, and we also have something we call DFA Night School, which is for people who can't travel to our trainings. We do that about once a month, where it's basically a national conference call. We usually have anywhere between 800 and 3,000 people on it. And we'll talk about how to organize precincts, how to message people. We had George Lakoff on for that one. How to even shut down a campaign. I mean, that's a very big deal, to make sure that everybody retains all the things that they learned and all the progress that they made, whether a campaign won or lost. I mean, we have a lot of different modules of that.
Now, Lakoff is the gentleman that wrote the book about how to get the message across.
Right.
You have a specific amount of time. I believe it's something like 7 seconds, 21 words. You want to put words together in such a way to effectively get your idea forward and put it forward to the people that you're speaking with in a limited amount of time. Before we know that we're in day-to-day conversations with people and friends, neighbors, whomever. They allow us a certain amount of time to get across what we want to say to them, and their interest starts to wane. And unfortunately, it's about 7 seconds. So you've got that 7-second time frame to get up to 21 words to get your point across.
We actually call it 27-9-3. It's an exercise that we do.
27-9-3.
27 words in 9 seconds, and you make 3 points.
27-9, 3 points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some might call it the elevator pitch. George talked about it in his book, Don't Think of an Elephant, which is a great book. And that's one of the exercises that we go through. And it's not, again, not necessarily for candidates. It's for folks who are canvassing and phone banking. If you get somebody on the phone when you're calling for a town action that's going on in your town or a candidate, you're not going to have a lot of time to get your point across, and you want to be able to have done that exercise because it'll make you a lot better at it.
Now you mentioned the media. Now, back in 2004, if we rewind back to then, Democracy for America began actually during the Dean campaign, during your brother's campaign, and there was what we call the blog, because at the time it was one of the few, might have been the first political blog.
Yep.
And it was, as you might imagine, as the audience might imagine, it was, we talk about the Democratic Party being something akin to herding cats. You had a bunch of people that would go online and chat online with each other about a specific topic or about anything that came to their mind. The conversation went back and forth. People would jump in, jump out. They'd take a few minutes during their workday. They'd jump in. They'd scan what had been said during the day. They'd make a comment. Now, we have the blogs still with Democracy for America, and there are many political blogs. Daily Kos. There's
very good ones.
Fire Dog Lake. There are political blogs that span the political spectrum, from right to left and everything in between. How has that changed since 2004? How has blogging changed the landscape of politics?
I think in a very positive way. I mean, it is to me a form of citizen journalism and discourse. And the fact that Marcos has been so successful with this on Daily Kos, and Jane on Fire Dog Lake have been very successful with it, only as a testament. As Marcos says, there's a great demand or market demand for this. And part of this has to do, frankly, with the decline of American media. But more importantly, it is about participation. I read blogs all the time, and I don't write very much on them, but I learn a lot of things on them. And frankly, I learn a lot more from reading blogs often than I do from reading the 30 or seeing the 30-second soundbite on TV. There's usually a backstory there. Usually there's a backstory, particularly if you're talking about a candidate or an election race. There's going to be a backstory from a part of the country where the candidate's from that I may not have spent any time with. Usually from somebody who's lived there and knows, and they're going to come out with a lot of information that you would never find on the media, and it's very difficult to find in the age of 30-second sound bites and headlines. So I think they've really, number one, expanded news coverage in a way that the media has not, because as you know, they're contracting and they're getting rid of all their journalists.
Certainly shrunk.
Reporters.
We know the newspapers have shrunk. They're hiring fewer and fewer people to actually cover beats.
Right. Well, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, the Los Angeles Times, which was a conservative paper, at least when I was growing up, but it was a widely read paper because it covered everything around Los Angeles. They don't have any reporters right now outside of Los Angeles anymore. The Washington Post is closing all of its U.S. bureaus. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So, and in particular, I think the media has made a mistake of while they're doing all these cutbacks, they still sort of project themselves as thought leaders, and that is simply wrong. I mean, you can't be a thought leader if you don't have any information to give out, and the less information that comes out from them, the more they keep marketing the story. So that's one of the reasons people aren't tuning in, and one of the reasons that they're tuning into the blogs right now.
So you'll have a loop on television nowadays of maybe 2 or 3 more sexy stories, and they'll play those loops over and over again, unless they get a really fabulous story, like some kid up in a balloon flying across America.
If you want to find out about Tiger Woods and Michael Jackson, tune in, and if you need to know about the serious stuff that's going on, particularly in politics, the blogs have really become a great place to go.
Now, you mentioned some of the more popular blogs, Daily Kos with Marcos Molisses, but locally we've got videographer, journalist, Al Robinson, who's a great guy. He's a great friend of the show. And thinking back to 2006, when a fellow by the name of Ned Lamont came out of nowhere in a very short period of time and became fairly well known in Connecticut in pretty short order. Al was there doing the videographing, and Democracy for America, as I recall, was very much involved in the generation and growth and what happened with the Lamont campaign. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, certainly we were big supporters of Ned, and I can get to this, but I do want to go back to your point about the local blogs. They are terrific, and we've got some very good ones here. And certainly in other states, in New Jersey, there's a great blog called Blue Jersey. In New York, neighboring state, there are a number of different blogs. The Albany Project is a great place to go to find out what's going on in state politics. My Left Nutmeg here is terrific.
It is.
And they really do a valuable
and a
service.
Clever name.
Yep. And the very interesting thing about Ned's campaign was, in the beginnings, particularly during the primary, most of the reporters for the, quote, mainstream news organs here were actually getting their information from the bloggers in Connecticut. That's exactly the way the information flow was going. It was out on the blogs, and then it was getting reported in places like the Hartford Courant or the Connecticut Post. That changed somewhat after the primary, but in the beginning, they were actually driving the news coverage. The blogs were driving the news coverage, particularly the local blogs. So it was, again, an invaluable service. And, in Ned's case, it was a tremendous experience for us. As you know, I happen to live here in Fairfield, and, I first talked to Ned about this in December of 2005, and I really appreciated his passion, and I walked out of this meeting thinking, I'm not sure if he could win or not because, Senator Lieberman has been around for such a long time, but this guy will give the citizens of Connecticut the chance to vote on the war in Iraq, which really had not happened in this country. And that's exactly what he did. And the testimony to his campaign, David, as much as anything else, there are two of them. One, 28,000 people registered into the Democratic Party in Connecticut to participate in this primary. That was enormous. And in a time when the independents have been growing and the party registrations themselves have been declining. So that was one good thing. The other thing that happened out of that primary was it changed the face of the 2006 elections across this country. We knew of many candidates who were running for Congress then who would not talk about the war in Iraq, beyond the fact that they thought that Bush had not done a good job. And that wasn't good enough. What we needed, what people were asking for, is what their policy was. What was their position on it? And it wasn't about ideology. It was really about a congressional candidate taking a stand, and they wouldn't do it. They kept running away. They were being told by their consultants. Ned's race changed that completely and forced these other candidates to step up to the plate and be straight with the voters.
That did, in fact, have not only a local effect in Connecticut, but a national effect, as you say. Candidates began to speak up. They saw, well, my goodness, what's happening in Connecticut tells us that we need to talk about the war. Now, backtracking a little bit, because I remember, because I'm very proud to report to the audience that our local Norwalk Democracy for America chapter was where Ned Lamont came to first. And we were the first chapter to actually endorse Ned, and I felt very comfortable with him. He was kind of a diamond in the rough. But, but he had, not just on the matter of the war, but on a lot of issues, a very, very sharp focus. And he very much took it to Lieberman.
Well, he did, but you don't sell yourself short on this. I mean, let's not forget that a lot of the folks in Norwalk and other areas of the state became integral parts of his campaign. Many of your folks were hired and then went on to work in other campaigns.
Absolutely.
And were performing critical functions in his campaign, which is what this is all about. Again, a citizen-driven campaign for good government. And so many times, and particularly in a Senate race, especially in a Senate race, the first thing you get is a bunch of consultants. Then you get a bunch of people from Washington who don't know anything about the location that you're living in or what the voters are really like, or the culture of the state, but they think they know everything. And the next thing you know, their whole business model is for the candidate to raise a ton of money so they can do a bunch of TV commercials, and then everybody goes off into the sunset. And this campaign, thanks to what you did and a lot of other folks did, really changed the dynamics of that.
We've seen a lot of movies, all of us, movies about politics, where a candidate has an idea, has a persona, and immediately people swoop in to tell them how to run a campaign, what to think, what to do, how to breathe, how to comb their hair, and their campaign very quickly loses its spontaneity and generally its ideas. And we see that even happening today. But when we have things like this happening on the grassroots level, people, the folks that are actually working the campaign on the local level. And just as two examples, John Hartwell came out of that Lamont campaign and ran for the state senate last year. A friend of mine by the name of Sal Liccione cut his teeth on that campaign and has been involved in many, many campaigns since then. So a lot of us got our genesis, our beginning of actually being active political people out of that Lamont campaign. We had videographers like Bob Adams, Connecticut Bob, who did a lot of videography about that. Again, Al Robinson, who did a lot of videography for the Lamont campaign. The list goes on and on and on. I can't get everybody, but there are just so many people that came out of that campaign that are still there. We're still active, and that's part of the reason, I think, as you mentioned in 2006, that we, in fact, took back our Congress. We had a sweeping move to take back the Congress, and then in 2008, it carried over into an increase in that, plus a fellow by the name of Barack Obama became president.
Well, that's true. And to your point, by the way, Ned's race was not the only race around the country that was powered in this fashion. Carol Shea Porter in New Hampshire had almost an all-volunteer staff. She had very little money when she started out. She had a little bit of political experience, and she beat an incumbent. It was a huge upset. Jerry McNerney, running against one of the most corrupt politicians, probably that's California even has ever seen, Richard Pombo, did it almost, again, an almost volunteer staff with no help from the party, at least in Washington. We had a huge upset. Just this last cycle, Bill Hedrick, running in California, almost beat Ken Calvert, who is half real estate mogul, half congressman, and that's a bit of a problem, but damn near won that race again with an all-volunteer staff. So there are a lot of other campaigns at very high levels that are being run this way, and I think that's good. And again, with clean money coming in, I think that's even going to make these races even more effective and, frankly, more connected to the voters and taxpayers.
And from there, again, if I can just rewind back to to your brother's campaign and then to Democracy for America, its beginning, we really, in fact, as a group, did very similar. And you mentioned, you touched on this, how Howard took the Republicans, what they did, what Ralph Reed and the rest of the Republicans did, in order to take the country away from us. They started at those grassroots levels. They started at the small offices. They won small elections and worked their way up through the ranks. And of course, they don't have the truth on their side like we do, or as I would at least like. But
they also became a top-down organization.
They did become later top-down.
And my little saying is, the party that empowers will be the party that's in power. And frankly, let's be candid, the Democrats don't really completely get this. But they've certainly seen the results of the work that we're doing, the work that you're doing, and they will soon get this. Either one way or the other, they will. And as long as they're empowering folks to be involved, I think they're going to be fine. And the minute they revert back to some of the kind of things they were doing in the 1990s, where it became a very Washington-centric party, is when things start to fall apart. And they've all seen this movie, so hopefully they're learning from it.
Well, the Republicans, it seems, Republicans are trying to do something similar now with their Tea Parties, but it for some reason it doesn't seem to be working. I mean, they're making a lot of claims that Tea Parties are actually empowering them in a grassroots sense, or using all the right terminology, but at the same time, they're reaching to the top and then looking down on their candidates and have this litmus test. That you have to have these 10 things about you, and if you don't have 7 of them, if you don't have 7 of those right 10 things, you cannot be a candidate for that party. Maybe 8 out of 10. And in fact, looking at it, we all figured out very quickly that even Ronald Reagan would not pass the litmus test.
Well, something like 40 members of Congress in the Republican Party would not pass the test. They have a couple of problems. One is they rode the crest of the Fox News media organ to the top, and now they're riding down with it because Fox is not a reliable news organ; it's a propaganda outlet. And I think most voters, particularly Republicans in places like here in Connecticut, are very, very uncomfortable with this sort of mass propaganda and ideology, because voters are complicated. They have a lot of different need states,
Propaganda is
and
the
they
right
don't
word.
necessarily work on ideology.
It might as well be Pravda, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. So they're riding that crest, and that is doing them a great disservice. The other part of this thing is that there isn't really any connection to the people. These teabag parties, particularly the town hall things, were well-financed campaigns,
Right.
which were marketed as grassroots,
Very top-down
but don't
instead.
really capture. They capture some of the populism and the anger about things like the bank bailouts, even though Bush was the one that actually legislated that and signed off on that bill. But the fact of the matter is, excuse me, there's no real connection right now to what they're doing, and that's because what they are standing for right now really doesn't work for American voters, except for the most extreme elements of our society right now.
And they certainly do purvey at least some very extreme views. With portraying mustaches on Obama and things like that. Some really graphic and very, very disturbing images that they seem to fall behind.
I think more importantly, let's look at the healthcare debate, which is something that we've been involved with all in for 8 months. They have become irrelevant in this because they've simply said no the whole time. They've offered up absolutely nothing. The president clearly tried to engage them, and frankly, Democrats spent way too much time trying to engage them, and they just went back to their districts in August and said they were against the whole thing, and they basically wasted 6 months of time not getting anything done. And I think the voters know things. People. The problem is you have too many people in Washington who think the voters aren't smart, and they are. And they're looking at this and they're saying, there's nothing that they're offering me in this debate right now other than to keep things the way they are, which is something that nobody wants right now.
I'm glad you mentioned the healthcare.
They're basically taking themselves out of the debate, and that, in effect, takes themselves out of a base.
I'm glad you mentioned healthcare, but we've got about a minute left. Wrap us up with Democracy for America's vision for where it's going. What's the future of Democracy for America?
Well, the future here is to continue to encourage people-powered politics. And the way we do that is to try to use the tools that we've already got, and hopefully some new technology and a few other things, to try to help get people involved and to take responsibility over this. And that is only going to grow further. And frankly, right now we're looking at a lot of different ways to make the party, both locally and nationally, far more responsive to this kind of way of doing business than the way that they actually do it right now. So you're going to see us much more involved in party politics, but you're going to see us remain focused on helping people who want to get involved to stay involved and to get involved in the first place.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, thanks for joining us. This has been Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. We have Jim Dean with us this evening.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Good evening.
All right.